Nightline 259 WKRN.
He's blamed for a growing sense of disarray in the White House, accused of alienating prominent Republican supporters. Today, under pressure, John Sununu called it quits as White House Chief of Staff. But was Sununu the reason for President Bush's sagging political fortunes, or just a convenient scapegoat?
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from New York, Forrest Sawyer.
Washington is a town with a long memory. Old grudges have a way of building up and, after a while, tearing down the people who put them there. John Sununu stepped down as White House Chief of Staff because he had created too many enemies. As long as those enemies were Democrats, Sununu was safe, even applauded for doing his job. But when he offended key Republicans on Capitol Hill, when he annoyed key players who will be working for the president's re-election, John Sununu became a liability. And his leaving signals a shakeup in the Bush White House, a recognition that the president, who had 90% approval ratings in March, is suddenly looking politically vulnerable. In Washington, John Sununu is being criticized for mismanaging the president's domestic agenda. But it is not the staff who will take the heat from the American people. It is Mr. Bush himself, who does not seem to have a clearly defined domestic agenda at all. Tonight, how does the White House put itself back on track? We begin with some background from Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield.
A governor of New Hampshire helps a Republican win the White House. He becomes chief of staff with a reputation for impatience, even arrogance. The president constantly offers public expressions of loyalty, but eventually the heat becomes too intense and the chief of staff quits. No, we're not talking about John Sununu. We're talking about Sherman Adams, who was President Eisenhower's second in command. Some even called him the real president, until charges of conflicts of interest brought him down in 1958. In fact, we could be talking about one of the most familiar of Washington figures. People like Nixon's Haldeman and Ehrlichman, or Jimmy Carter's Burt Lance, or Ronald Reagan's Donald Regan. The behind-the-scenes personality who wields enormous power, who draws enormous heat, and who as often as not falls from power because he forgets that in any White House there is only one truly indispensable figure.
In addition,
for John Sununu, the trouble was a blend of personality and politics. Sununu did not suffer fools gladly, and his definition of fool sometimes seemed to include anyone who disagreed with him. Cabinet members and Republican congressmen alike found him very difficult.
You just don't hang up on congressmen and senators and get in verbal exchanges with people that you have to work with and count on every day and not have it catch up with you.
And when his travel habits, summoning government airplanes and limousines for personal trips, drew criticism, Sununu's response suggested a very high level of self-importance.
I have to be able to communicate, to work on sensitive papers, to coordinate the White House activities even while I'm traveling. I constantly have to go and communicate back to the White House every 10 or 15 minutes.
That stumble gave Sununu's many enemies a target of opportunity. When your enemy becomes the target of laughter, he is at his weakest. The Democratic candidates recently demonstrated just that.
You've got John Sununu, totally in charge of the domestic agenda. So what does that leave George Bush an opportunity to be in charge of and to run? The golf cart. Not to worry. Not to worry.
But Sununu's final fall from grace was bound up with the steady decline of the president's strength in the last 9 months. Since the end of the Gulf War and the collapse of communism turned the spotlight back on domestic affairs, the White House has sometimes seemed to be in something like a free fall. Buffeted by rising economic fears, the country has turned somewhat sour on Mr. Bush. His approval ratings have tumbled, below 50% by one recent measure. Fewer than 1 in 5 like his handling of the economy. And the economy was the key for the shocking Pennsylvania results last month when Democrat Harris Wofford beat the highly favored Richard Thornburgh, President Bush's surrogate and former Attorney General. At times, the president has seemed almost uncertain of his own positions, dismissing and embracing GOP congressional ideas on the same day. casually throwing off a suggestion to lower bank credit card interest rates that sent the stock market down 120 points, and saw Chief of Staff Sununu astonishingly deflecting responsibility upward.
How did it get in?
President ad-libbed.
In the end, many conservatives seem to be in near open revolt, with a planned presidential primary challenge from commentator Pat Buchanan, and with a proposal by 82 House Republicans that Bush name Housing Secretary Jack Kemp as his economic czar. And the press was filled with unmistakable signals to Sununu that it was time to go. Sununu openly acknowledged today that he'd gotten the message.
I'd always told him that if I could serve him best by being in the job, I wanted to be in the job, and if I became a political burden, I'd be willing to leave.
For some conservatives, Sununu's departure was very disturbing news.
I think the conservative wing of the Republican Party, at least on Capitol Hill, has lost a very important link to the White House, someone that we trusted.
And some said it was the liberal media's fault.
But I think any chief of staff who aggressively represents conservative views in Washington is going to have trouble with the White House press corps. I mean, it's just unavoidable.
Democrats were just as quick to signal their determination to keep the president the focus of their fire.
I think the American people know that staff people come and go, but what they're not seeing is leadership from the one person who can exert it, and that's the President of the United States.
John Sununu is gone because he simply broke too many rules for White House staff survival, and because with an election season about to begin, he had become a political liability the president could no longer afford. But as insiders burn up the phone lines and dinner parties with gossip and one-liners, we might pause to remember one enduring political fact. No staff member, however powerful, however controversial, ever won or lost a presidential election. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline.
And when we come back, we will talk with former Senator Howard Baker, who served as President Reagan's chief of staff, with former Reagan campaign director Ed Rollins, and with Fred Barnes, senior editor of The New Republic.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Charles Schwab.
Everyone has a dream, a vision deep inside.
When I decide to follow up on an investing idea, I need a broker who's ready when I am.
We make it easier to follow your own lead.
I can call Schwab at any hour, nights or weekends, get the information I need, even place an order to trade.
Always there to give you just the help you need.
Help yourself at Schwab today.
You can count on Sears for great Christmas values, like this 386SX personal computer from Packard Bell, with 40 megabyte hard drive and more, all for $21 a month. Don't miss it. Only at Sears Brand Central now.
Share the fantasy. Chanel number 5.
After 10 years in Nashville, your furniture center's closing its doors, and everything in all 3 showrooms must go. We've marked our entire inventory incredibly low. In fact, all the way down to what it cost us to operate, because we'd rather sell it to you than to have to move it. We're clearing our stores to the bare walls. No public liquidators will be brought in, and no prices raised. This is a true wall-to-wall sellout. So hurry to your furniture center in Rivergate, Whitesbridge, and Nolensville, but hurry for the best selection, because once it's gone, it's gone.
Goodbye, Tide with Bleach. Here's Ultra.
When I had the kids, I thought I'd bought my last white towel.
Instead of a cup, one little scoop.
I thought that little scoop was just too small. This washcloth is caked with mud, ground into the terry cloth.
Take dirt gone down to the fiber. Gets only this white with this other detergent, but with Ultra Tide with Bleach, it's whiter without chlorine bleach.
I don't need liquid bleach anymore. This is my kind of white.
Today's Tide with Bleach is Ultra.
The French have something the United States doesn't. Low-cost daycare for everyone. How do they do it? The American Agenda on ABC's World News tonight.
Joining us from Knoxville, Tennessee, is former Senator Howard Baker, who was Chief of Staff for President Reagan from February 1987 to July 1988. From our Washington studios, Ed Rollins, who directed Ronald Reagan's 1984 re-election campaign and has been openly critical of John Sununu. And Fred Barnes, senior editor of The New Republic, who writes a weekly column called White House Watch. Now, Senator, you have seen this sort of thing before. Don Regan had to depart as chief of staff for President Reagan under the same kinds of criticism. You have a sense of timing. Was this trip necessary at this time?
Well, I think it was done with some style and grace, Forrest. I think it's pretty clear that the storm clouds had been gathering to the place where something was going to have to give. And I think Sununu, in his letter today to the president, laid it out pretty straight. He made it clear that if he was a liability, that he wanted to go. And that's the ultimate loyalty to the president, and that's the only loyalty a chief of staff ought to have.
But he's weathered a few before. Do you believe that it was necessary? Was he such a liability that he had to step down now?
Well, I don't know whether he had to or not. He probably could have survived. After all, it doesn't matter what anybody thinks, really, except one person, and that's the president. And if the president had wanted him to stay on and Sununu had been willing, I suppose they could have weathered for a while longer. But I really do think, from a political standpoint, that it was the right decision, both by the president and by Sununu.
Mr. Rollins, when it comes down to it, what do you see was the great problem with Mr. Sununu? Why did he become such a liability to the president?
He alienated a lot of very key political players in this town. He didn't give the members of Congress and the members of his own party their just due. A chief of staff lives off of the reflected power of a president, and his responsibility is to serve that president. He's to be the political antenna of the White House, and John Sununu just wasn't a very good political craftsman.
But you listen to a lot of people who are on the right of the party. They feel very badly that John Sununu has left. They feel that they have lost one of their most ardent allies, and a man who would argue their case. Are they hurt by this?
Well, obviously it depends on who replaces him. I think the great fear that a lot of conservatives like Henry Hyde is that the president might replace John Sununu with someone who's pro-choice or someone who didn't quite live up to their conservative standards. The bottom line is the president's the one who has to make those decisions, and he's the one who has to please conservatives.
Fred, you heard the point made in Jeff's piece, and it's been said very often that the American people don't really care who's on the staff or who the White House chief of staff is. That's inside baseball. What they care about is what the president does. Now, is this a big deal in the broader scheme of things?
Well, not in the broader scheme of things. It's a big deal inside the Beltway, inside the political community in Washington. It's a big deal for the journalistic community, which focuses obsessively on this office of White House Chief of Staff. But this will help Bush for a week, give him a press holiday and nice coverage of his new Chief of Staff, whoever that is. But the fundamental problems of the Bush administration remain, and that is an economic problem with a stagnant economy and an ideological problem where Bush really has no ideological rudder to steer his economic and domestic policy.
But you know, the critics are saying, at least a lot of them, they'll point to Mr. Sununu. They'll say, here's the man who was in charge of the domestic agenda. He's the fellow who should have been moving it forward. And that's where the logjam was. They were just having a tremendous amount of trouble dealing with him. He's gone. The president's going to do better.
Yeah, no, I think they're wrong about that. The fact is that President Bush is a very difficult president to work for just because he doesn't have an ideology. He wants everything. On civil rights, he wanted to be for affirmative action, and that pleased the civil rights lobby, but he also wanted the conservatives to like him. On the environment, he wanted to be the environmental president, but he also wanted to be known as a deregulator and wanted everybody to like him. On the budget deal, he wanted to raise taxes, but he didn't want to alienate conservatives. And he assigned Sununu all these jobs to achieve these things that were basically unattainable.
This sense, Senator, that you hear in the press over and over again, that this is a presidency that is in some disarray on the domestic side. Do you have that feeling?
I don't have that feeling. I think that, to begin with, it's a lifetime between now and November of 1992, and I'll guarantee you that the situation will look different maybe 2 or 3 times between now and election time. I have some confidence that the economy is going to recover, and I think that'll have a profound effect on the president's popularity. But I also don't agree with Fred that George Bush has no rudder. I think he has a very clear idea of what he wants to do, and in essence, it's a modification of the Reagan philosophy of government, which had to do with giving business and individuals and commerce an opportunity to do their thing. And I think as long as he gives that opportunity to the public, that they'll respond to it, regardless of who's chief of staff.
There you are, Fred. You're just wrong.
Well, the president certainly hasn't conveyed that there's a strong philosophy behind what his economic policy is, and it's not that the president flip-flops on economic policy from day to day. This White House is flip-flopped from hour to hour. One moment the president's for an economic growth package that must be voted on today, and then later in the day, his staff is on the Hill, his Treasury Secretary telling Congress, don't vote on this, go home.
Fred, I've been in government 20 years, and I've heard the same thing for 20 years. Every president I've ever known, Republican and Democrat, has the flexibility to change their mind from time to time, whether it's to accommodate Congress or to accommodate changed circumstances. I don't think the, quote, flip-flop quotient has been any greater in the Bush administration than it has in any other.
Maybe not, but the funny thing is about President Bush and John Sununu compared to President Reagan. You know, Reagan was blamed for delegating a great deal of his policy decisions to people like Howard Baker and others. In fact, I think President Bush has done more of that on domestic policy than President Reagan did.
Ed, jump in here. What do you think about all of this? Do you think the president has been guiding a ship that hasn't got much rudder?
No, I think the president has been focused on foreign affairs as he properly should have. The world has changed dramatically under his watch, and he certainly has become the foremost leader in the world in the international arena. I think we're now back on domestic issues. We're now beginning a campaign season. What 6 months ago looked like a coronation now is going to be a close competitive election. The economy is going to be tough to get moving again, and I think it's important for this president and for the staff, and I think a new chief of staff will be able to bring in a new staff and create new energy and create new political aspects of the White House. They're going to have a campaign, and they have to get ready for it.
Do you buy the argument that it finally comes down to the economy for the president, that he's going to be vulnerable there or not?
It always comes down to the economy and domestic issues in a re-election. If Americans feel that this president has the right formula to keep this economy moving and growing, he'll be reelected and reelected easily. If for some reason they don't think he's going to provide the leadership and the Democrats offer an alternative, which I haven't seen yet, but if they do, and that's believable, then it's going to be a much closer election.
All right, let's pause there. When we come back, let's take a look at what this new White House will look at and also look down the road toward Election 92 in just one moment.
Ford Motor Company profiles in quality, employee involvement.
If you're working together, you'll do a better job. I said that back in '82, and the quality of our cars and trucks is proof that it's working today.
Money alone won't build quality cars. You've got to have better designs.
Better designs don't mean a thing unless engineering can live up to the designs.
Engineering works only when everyone is committed to quality.
Our goal is to build the highest quality cars and trucks in the world.
At Ford, quality is job one.
You don't want to get bogged down in revolving debt on bank cards. All that outrageous interest. This is not for you. You know how to get out of that trap. The American Express card. Don't leave home without it.
A cold starts small, but before you know it, your cold is full grown. Maximum strength Dimetapp relieves sneezing and congestion. 12-hour Dimetapp Extend tabs. Relief for the full-grown cold.
Ma, when does the cast come off?
Why, don't you guys like washing dishes?
Ooh, pork grease. Bogus. Here, you do it. You do it. You do it. Ma, you do it.
Relax, Dawn will do it.
Give Dawn your greasiest grease. Dawn will break it up and take it away.
Somebody forgot this.
Not in the greasy water, bonehead. My glass is as clean as the stuff you washed, so you're the bonehead. No, you aren't.
Keep it up and the cast stays on permanently.
Dawn, it takes grease out of your way.
It doesn't get any better than this until you call for help. Call 373-8700 for a free confidential consultation. The Harbors. You have a device in your home that fights the pain alcohol and drugs inflict on your family. Use it. Call 373-8700 for a free confidential consultation. The Harbors.
Where should we go for the holidays? Dairy Queen. 'Tis the season for the annual Holiday Full Meal Deal. Get in the spirit with a big juicy burger, piping hot fries, soft drink, and a 5-ounce sundae. Then get really festive with this collectible holiday glass. All at one great price, just $3.19. The $3.19 Holiday Full Meal Deal. We give you taste, we give you value, we treat you right. Dairy Queen.
The effects and memories are overwhelming. Hear stories from both sides. Join David Brinkley, Pearl Harbor. 2 hours that changed the world. Thursday.
No bones about it. Tomorrow, the tallest dinosaur exhibit ever.
Plus Star Trek's Leonard Nimoy and a cure for the holiday blues on Good Morning America tomorrow.
Changes in the White House. Chief of Staff John Sununu has offered to step down. Senator, we like to sneak out and buy the New York Times for tomorrow a little ahead of time. I noticed that a senior White House official has told them that the all but certain choice for the new Chief of Staff is Transportation Secretary Samuel Skinner. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, I think Sam Skinner is certainly the front runner. I would be very surprised if the president's already made a decision, but I expect him to do that soon. But I hear other names, and I think there are other people who are equally qualified to be Chief of Staff. It really boils down to who the president wants, but Skinner would be good.
Do you see some similarities between the time that you came into the White House as Chief of Staff back in '87 and the situation that this new Chief of Staff will be facing?
No, I really don't, Forrest. I think they're vastly different. And in 1987, President Reagan was in deep trouble on allegations, I think, which were unfounded about his involvement in Iran-Contra. He was in the low 20s, maybe the high 20s in popularity rating at that time, and the government was right on the brink of crisis. But he came back from that, and I think very successfully. I don't see anything like the same crisis now. In addition to that, I think that Sununu and President Bush have pulled this thing off with some style and without the conflict and acrimony that appeared to surround the departure of my friend Don Regan.
Well, Fred, I expect you've been doing some talking to people. Do you have a sense of how the White House is going to start addressing some of its problems now, where it's going to start first?
The fact is I don't, because I don't think the White House has decided. Sam Skinner, I'm told, may or may not be the next White House Chief of Staff. There is clearly someone in the Bush administration who is exactly the right choice to be the next White House Chief of Staff, and that's Defense Secretary Dick Cheney. He was the White House Chief of Staff for Gerald Ford in the year that Ford ran for re-election. Now, Ford didn't win, but the whole re-election effort was a tremendous performance. Cheney has done this. He has the respect of the press, Congress, and so on, but unfortunately, I'm told at the White House that Cheney will not be asked.
Well, whoever it is, what is he going to have to do? How are they going to start solving what appears to be some listing in the water?
Well, there's a lot of listing in the water. The first thing they have to do is bind together George Bush's political base. I think there's one issue that has to be the core of the campaign for any Republican president running for re-election, and that is the tax issue. That's what binds Republicans together. A Republican to pull this base together has to be for reducing taxes. Unfortunately, Bush, a year ago, raised taxes. Now he's going to have to change course, decisively come out for a tax reduction package. Otherwise, he's going to have trouble dealing with the Pat Buchanan challenge, among other things.
Well, there is the argument, Ed, that this is not about principle. It is about the president's ratings, that they have been steadily dropping and that John Sununu would remain there if the president's ratings were very high. It's really about making sure that the president is re-electable. Is that right?
Well, I think it's important to put a political team together. I've been in this town 20 years. I've watched 11 chiefs of staff under 5 presidents. The best chiefs of staff have been team builders. Howard Baker, when he came into the White House, brought in a guy named Ken Duberstein and built a very effective team who ended up being the final chief of staff. Dick Cheney built a team. They were political guys who understood the nuances of the Hill, understand the political bases that Fred is talking about. I would hope the next chief of staff, whether it be Sam Skinner or whoever, who also has good political instincts, builds a team, gets ready for a re-election, because it's going to be a long, hard year.
Now, that chief of staff is going to have to work in parallel, I suppose, with the re-election campaign.
It's very critical. Someone like Jim Baker, who I worked with very closely in 1984, some with Ken Duberstein, who worked very effectively with the '88 campaign, you just have to work in sync, because if you end up in conflict and you're fighting among yourselves, the Democrats obviously make hay out of that.
I know that Ed Senator told me earlier today that it's really George Bush against George Bush so far, that any of the problems he's had have been self-created. The Democrats haven't been able to make any hay out of that so far. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that totally. The Democrats have not laid a glove on this president. The last 3 or 4 weeks have been as great a disarray as I've seen in any White House, in which they've stepped all over their story, stepped all over their message. It's very important for this president to decide on his agenda, what he's going to run on his message, and he ought to basically respect the Democrats, but not let them decide how he's going to run or govern this country.
You've been around the grace course a few times, Senator. What do you think? Where are the dangers for this president at this point? Where is he vulnerable?
Well, I think the president has one single responsibility in the time remaining in this year, which is really the time before the beginning of the campaign in '92, and that's to make sure that his program for his second term is clearly stated and easily understood. I think the president has the right instincts, the right motives, the right philosophy, But I don't think we've been able to get that message across to the American people effectively on domestic policy. I think he's done a superb job on foreign policy, but we're going to have to revamp the presentation that the President and his administration make to the country in preparation of the 92 campaign. I hope it is done clearly and succinctly in the State of the Union message, and I hope that the new Chief of Staff will be a facilitator to see that the President's ideas are clearly stated and easily understood.
Well, Fred, what a lot of people say is that the pundits, critics, analysts, and tongue waggers just overestimate this thing. The President really is not nearly so weak as they like to point out. This is a man who's got a tremendous amount of strength there.
Well, he's a lot weaker than he was 3 months ago. Then he looked unbeatable. Now he is beatable. Will he be beaten? I suspect he'll win, but he's certainly in a lot more vulnerable position than he needed to be, or than most people, including me, expected him to be. And Senator Baker said the President needs to really spell out his program. First thing he's got to do is decide on what his program is. What is it going to be that he's going to talk about next year? What's he going to say about taxes? What's he going to say about health care? What's he going to say about crime? How is he going to describe his foreign policy? These decisions have to be made, and in the last few weeks we've seen a White House that's been paralyzed. I don't blame John Sununu for that. I think the President's at fault.
Is, Senator, the Chief of Staff the man who can pull these kinds of issues together, that can provide some kind of focus for this presidency?
Yeah, in my view, Forrest, a Chief of Staff has to understand two things. One, that George Bush or whomever is president, he is not president. And therefore, his sole responsibility is to carry out the president's wishes. So a Chief of Staff has a primary responsibility to translate the president's philosophy and his decisions into useful political policy. I think that the Chief of Staff, all of them I've known, pretty well understand that. And I think it's important that the person who's chosen to succeed John Sununu take that to heart immediately, that his job is to gather up the facts, to present the options to the President, help the President formulate the policy that he's going to present to the country, and express it clearly and express it so that it's easily understood.
Senator, gentlemen, thank you very much for talking to us tonight. We'll be back in just one moment with a program note.
When it comes to mice, a lot of people are in the dark. They just don't know that for every mouse you see, there may be 15 or 20 that you don't see, or that mice eat in many different places. A very unhealthy situation. Unless you put Decon Mouseproof in the many places mice feed, like behind the refrigerator, in back of the cupboard, and behind the washer, so the mice will find it faster and end your problem faster. Decon Mouseproof gets mice right where they live.
Panasonic presents a new breed of smooth operator. The new Smooth Operator rechargeable razor unites the old-fashioned closeness of a warm, wet shave with the convenience and no-nick comfort of an electric. Don't try this with any plugged-in razor. Smooth Operator wet-dry razors from Panasonic. Smoother than you ever thought you'd be.
So, you just got a cash advance, did you? Too bad you used an ordinary credit card. Because you could be carrying some very heavy interest charges. Why not carry the Discover card? Just pay your full monthly balance and a small transaction fee, and we'll forget the interest. Which means our money comes with no strings attached. It pays to Discover.
You can count on Sears for great Christmas values. This Craftsman 13-drawer heavy-gauge steel professional chest and cabinet combination is a fantastic $299.98. A great price, a great gift, and only at Sears now.
There's never been a better time to buy a mink.
We want to give you an update on the hostage situation which we've been tracking all night. American Alan Steen is now at a U.S. military hospital in Germany, and he is the second hostage released in 2 days. The last American being held in Lebanon, Terry Anderson, is expected to be released soon, perhaps tomorrow. Anderson has been a hostage for nearly 7 years. ABC News is following the hostage story, and of course we'll keep you updated as events warrant. That's our report for tonight. I'm Forrest Sawyer in New York, and for all of us here at ABC News, good night.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
What do you know about love? What do you really know? Seems the more you care for someone, the more complicated things get. But that's what makes it interesting.
Peter Onorati stars in Civil Wars, Wednesday.
There are two sides to every love story on Civil Wars.
It doesn't get any better than this until you call for help.